add a eco-fuel to our hybrid vehicle of conversation. It is the bonus episode.
Sweet, should we start then?
Yeah, are you going to do the intro, Dom?
All right.
Can you say Jaques?
Is it Jaques? I always said Jaques.
Hey, Jaques. I don't know. It's English, not French.
Right. Okay.
But you could make it sound fancier. I don't know.
All right. Welcome to the... Is this the second bonus one? The second bonus episode of How Not to Be Enough?
It's the third.
Oh, fuck, who cares? Todd's drunk. I don't... what's happening? Tonight's guest is Natalie Jaques, or Jaques. No one's sure. Not even Natalie. She's a PhD student, an activist, a hater of small dogs. Natalie.
Do you hate Dom's dog as well, Nat?
We have a kind of mixed relationship. I've tented with Chili. He's not a very happy camper.
No, that sounds like an awful experience.
Well, one time Nat was quite wasted and he attacked her and she didn't pull her hand away and then her hand got all ruined.
Yeah, that's true. I still have a little chili mark on my hand.
You know how I'm sure a lot of us can relate to this, but you come up through life and you don't have much responsibilities and you like to fancy yourself as quite irreverent, and then you meet an animal or a child who makes you believe in authoritarianism. And I think Dom's dog does that to me. I'm like, that dog needs some fucking discipline.
Yeah, I give him lots of discipline.
Rubbish.
I do. Do you know Dave got this thing, my flatmate, to you press the button and it emits a noise that the dogs don't like, so you use it to discipline them. And he just got it, and I got it out of the packet, and I pressed the button, and then both the dogs started cowering, and I felt terrible.
Yeah, that sounds regime-ish.
Yeah, that's pretty cruel, I reckon.
Yeah.
Just before you came on, Nat, Todd was asking what you study, and I wasn't sure. I said something about revolution and mass transit. Is that right?
Yeah. It's in sociology, and I'm looking at the history of economic restructuring. But so basically looking at how supply chains started and sort of container shipping and distributed production. And I'm looking at that in order to understand how best to disrupt it and leverage power within it. So it's kind of like before that, workers would go on a strike in a factory, right? And that's how you could make your conditions better or protest something. You refuse to work. But now we don't have that kind of work available to people. So what you can do instead is disrupt the movement of goods, and that's sort of a similar way of disrupting capitalism as if you were refusing to work. So if you stop things from getting to store, if you stop them from being able to be consumed or bought, you're still compromising profits.
Yeah. Is there examples of this?
Or in a similar way if you didn't work.
Is there examples of this?
One of the ones that I'm looking at is Occupy Oakland and the West Coast port shutdown. So in 2012, the big Occupy movement was happening. And there was a coordinated shutdown of all of the ports on the West Coast, which bring in like 50% of all of the imported goods to the United States. So basically it's stopping everything coming from Asia entering through there. And so you shut it down on the ports. And it's also happened around solidarity actions, like there was an event called Block the Boat for Gaza, which was Palestine activists stopping goods coming off an Israeli ship as part of the boycott, divestment and sanction movement. So it was, like a way to express solidarity with Palestinians by not just not buying Israeli goods, but by not even allowing them to enter the country, by stopping them at the port. And they did that blockade for, I think, 8 days, and then the ship left without a single container unloaded.
Oh, wow. I think I saw an example like in the last couple of weeks. I think it might have been on the east coast of America where, I'm not going to remember any details of this, but there was some sort of action occurring at the port that was, and I think it was the dock workers, because it immediately made me think of Frank Sobotka from The Wire.
Is that your favorite TV show? That season of The Wire?
I never even finished The Wire. That's bad, eh? But I've seen season 2 and been told to watch season 2 a lot. But I don't really study like East Asian sex. What are they? Eastern European sex workers being trafficked or something. That's that season, eh?
Yeah. They were trafficking.
That's less my area of specialty.
Yeah, they were trafficking other things, but then they got into a bit of trouble when they started.
A bit of hot water.
Yeah.
I just rewatched it. We watched The Wire. We've already talked about this in the podcast, actually. Never mind. Moving on. What was one of your questions you had, Todd? Before you were coming on, Todd was like, said he would be keen to do a quiz about Marxism with you later as well.
As in like a competition, but
yeah.
But because I would lose, obviously. But I guess I got
confidence, Todd.
I have none.
Drunken bravado.
I've got confidence in my questions though, and I guess we didn't specify that we'd ask you to come on because this is indeed a special on communism, is it? Is that what we're doing?
Well, won't that be in the title? Can you edit this out, Dan?
Sure.
You're not even making a note.
I'm fucking looking at the time.
Yeah, you're looking at the time. You're not writing anything. I can see you.
I have to look first.
See your little fucking hands aren't moving.
Hang on, I need to open the notes. Yep,
I'm
making a note.
I'm trying to
cut any of this out, Nat.
I'm trying to figure what is the best starting point question I have.
Well, I guess like what would be how would you sum up Marxism in a sort of layman's terms? Keeping in mind that no one here and most of our guests didn't finish high school.
Yeah, someone's going to check my references. I guess, well, I was involved in this like seminar series and book project that Dominic actually spoke at, and the title of it was Everything's Fucked, but the point is to go beyond that. And I think that's a pretty good summation of why it matters. You know, it's about being able to understand how conditions of like inequality or social degradation or these bad things that we see happening all the time, they're not just engineered by sort of individual evil people, and they're not random, and they're not sort of spiritual. They come out of sort of structural forces, and so if you can understand them, then you can understand how to dismantle and overcome them. So it's sort of being able to identify a problem and then see that collective power can be used to change the problem or overcome it.
And something I've been thinking about recently is, you know, as means of production changes in the modern world, and a real good example of how, you know, because for instance, one that was real close to us was when the music industry really changed, and you think, the means of production now belongs to the workers, like the people producing the music can afford everything they need, but capitalism is bigger and more powerful than that, and they just find ways to circumvent artists gaining means control of means of production, and then they just take control again, and that kind of happens with every new wave. Like filmmaking becomes cheap and accessible to everyone, or not everyone, but you know, and it happens with all these industries, and it continues to happen. I don't really have a point.
You don't have a question?
Yeah. It's interesting though, because it's like these contradictions in technology, right? So one of the other key points within Marxism, but also just a fact, is that like all the stuff we have is made by workers, right? Like technology, everything's made by people. But then that gets appropriated and the access to it is controlled by the elite capitalist class. But yeah, it's interesting how something that can simultaneously be a problem can also be like an empowering possibility. Yeah, so even with say like platform ways of making new media, you know, you have YouTube, you have people generating content, but then you also have Google siloing and containing and controlling how it's distributed and who has access and stuff. So yeah, it's sort of also always trying to find those possibilities for like emancipation and change in those new technologies as well.
Yeah, because it can be constantly dismaying, right? Because something new will pop up, say YouTube, for instance. and it's very exciting, and then all of a sudden it gets really bad. Like, and I think following what's been happening with YouTube recently, like people getting radicalized to alt-right ways of thinking and worse. But it seems like YouTube's beginning to take some action now. Like, I think just a couple of days ago they banned Stefan Molyneux and a couple of other people whose names I didn't actually recognize. But it just, to me, it seems like every time there's a glimmer of possibility of things belonging to the people, it's snatched away or, perverted in some sort of dark way.
Sweet. Can you edit that silence out too, Dan?
That was good. It was just add some like dramatic music there.
Me.
Is there anything like that you look to that's sort of happening in the world at the moment that you think sort of gives you some hope that maybe like some of these principles could be enacted, or there would be a possibility of some kind of systematic change on a large scale?
Yeah, I guess it depends what the change is. I mean, there's a few different ways that people go about it, right? Like one is changing the nature of work and struggling for, people not having to work to survive. And so things like universal basic incomes or establishing state services that take away that burden. And then other ones might be around producing differently. So if you look at Venezuela, they have the comunas, right, where they have like small scale local democracy that organizes production, and then they sort of trade and figure that stuff out. That's like a new sort of experiment in that kind of way of doing things, with like local democracy and production. But I think there's also like the individual social relationships and stuff. Like the world is terrible at the moment, but even if you think around what's happening with like Black Lives Matter movement and challenging the institutional racism of the police, or even the kind of language that's used around like consent and stuff now, like those individual sort of forms of making the world better that aren't necessarily just about capitalism but are connected to it.
Yeah.
I think those things are really hopeful and inspiring.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah,
No, you go, Todd.
Yeah, another thing I've been thinking about is in regards to change and seeing things change, and there's so much happening like right at this particular moment, and you see like public opinions changing because of BLM, which is real encouraging. And then it's so big and overawing to try and understand as a whole thing sometimes. And then so I was thinking about things, symbolic change, all the discussion around statues and stuff. Is that, and those are like tiny little victories, but do they really mean much, or is that like consolation prizes being given to the people as a distraction, or is it meaningful and significant? Any thoughts, anyone?
Yeah, I mean, I was reading something which was saying that they, there's a reason why people have been allowed to pull these statues down, because, it's sort of, they're sort of victories that, whilst they have meaning, I guess it's not going to necessarily lead to change necessarily, but like at the same time, someone else pointed out, it was like, but like every time I see that, it fucking reminds me that these people, enslaved or murdered my ancestors. So I don't know. I guess it can be both things, right?
Yeah.
It can be an important thing to do, but maybe it has also been allowed to happen. Yeah,
because it has seemed like kind of too easy. Like there hasn't been much of a fight on the other end.
It also might just be a pendulum shift, right?
Yeah, true that. And in that way, then symbolic change can be just part of material change, or right?
Yeah. I mean, this was like with my PhD project and why I ended up looking at shipping and global production. It was kind of coming out of this frustration with, when you go to a protest and you walk up a high street and you've got a banner saying like, don't sell this, or this thing's terrible, and you have a day like walking up a hill, and then that's meant to have like, dissipated all of that anger. And then at the same time in New Zealand in particular, there's real restrictive laws around when you can even go on strike. So it's just like, well, what do you do? How do you actually harness power or hold people to account with any leverage? And so that was kind of why I was interested in looking at actually trying to disrupt production. But there's that actually ends up kind of being a sort of symbolic protest too, even if it's more expensive. Like that example of Occupy Oakland, they shut down the port twice in 2012, but they didn't overthrow capitalism. They just did a kind of costly action. So I guess there's sort of a question of what makes something symbolic. Like, does it have to have really long-lasting effects? Like everything's symbolic, kind of. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. I'm super interested in that because, like for me, marching often, like it feels really good in the moment, but then afterwards it often feels like, wow, like, was that a confrontation with power or was it, venting? And I mean, like, you can see results of all the marches and what it's achieving, but I definitely do feel like capitalism doesn't speak the language of engaging in a conversation with people. The language capitalism understands is money. So, like, writing...
I think when a march or a protest is having an effect, though, because of the way the cops react. Do you know what I mean? Like, if they're out there enforcing, beating the shit out of people, then you can tell that they're... Do you know what I mean? This is actually disrupting something that they consider important.
Yeah.
Like I remember, this is so long ago now, but like when the APEC meeting came here and our school actually, because I was an alternative school, went down and protested, and the cops just beat the shit out of anyone that came anywhere near the thing because it was all full of world leaders. And do you know what I mean? They didn't want the optics on television of these protesters.
Yeah.
Then is it more, if you have a centre-left government in power who are less likely to have a heavy-handed law enforcement presence at protests and such things, is that more dangerous in an insidious way then?
Yeah, kind of. It's often called like capitalism with a human face, like that's why you swing from having a right-wing government that comes in and makes heaps of cuts in budgets and does really sort of vicious things, and then you bring in a Labour government that just sort of, tells people to be kind while poverty continues.
Yeah, it's really stark in the States at the moment with Joe Biden running against Donald Trump, and just his whole campaign is like, oh, I'm not Donald Trump, and he's like, and just while a pandemic is going on, refuses to endorse socialized medicine. It's insane. And like, people of leftist values are expected to vote for someone who doesn't even believe in socialized medicine, which exists all around the world. It's so fucking crazy to watch. And I don't know, man. Like, and I guess that's like, America's an example of where that kind of two-party thing heads, right? A real extreme example that things just get diluted. The left gets eaten by the right, and if you truly believe in, I don't know, equality and things, you don't actually have anyone to fucking vote for.
But do you really have anyone to vote for here, though? Even
Well, I don't know. I like a lot of what I was wanting to discuss this too, because the Greens are the most representative party of our ideas and ideals, right?
Sure.
But does New Zealand need a party that's further left than that?
I mean, yeah, probably. But part of it as well is it's a whole strategy question as well around whether being in parliamentary politics is useful. Like, I think there's a lot of people, this idea of deconstructing the machine from within. There's a lot of people who've banged their head against that particular brick wall and been kind of chewed up and spat out by a system that is so resistant to change. Like, you end up with one or two MPs who might you know, be like banging on about things needing to be better, but then they're just kind of treated as just like one lone radical who doesn't really represent the majority. And yeah, and I don't even know, like you in New Zealand say what you can get like a members bill, like Hone Harawira had the Feed the Kids bill come up as a members bill, and I don't actually even know what happened with that in the end. But yeah, it's whether or not you can do any sort of institutional long-term change.
Yeah. Values and policy-wise, would you call the Greens a socialist party, or are they not quite that far?
Nah, I don't think that they want to be a socialist party.
Well, you can't say that even if you were, right? Because there's so much stigma attached to the term.
Yeah, they're like a truly social democratic party. But yeah, I mean, I reckon there should be like a shakedown in all of the parties where, you know, 20% of them just shift to the next right party. You know, like the right wing of Greens just joined Labour and the right wing of Labour just joined, which is kind of how the Jaques party started. Like,
yeah.
But that would be like maybe a bit more honest.
Yeah, it's interesting that we don't have anyone further to the left. I guess it's like you say, Nat, it's probably a pretty fucking thankless job. What's the difference between communism and socialism? Because I got asked that the other day and I don't know if I gave a particularly good answer.
What was your answer?
I said that socialism was the sort of stage between capitalism and communism. And then when you got to communism, there's no more money or ownership or property or anything.
Yeah, I don't know if I feel well equipped to answer this question. Well,
otherwise Dan's going to have to answer it and you don't want that.
Yeah, I think historically socialism has been tied to like a much bigger role of the state, whereas communism is maybe more like distributed forms of power. But I think, sort of my own understanding of communism is based on that idea from Marx, each according to their ability, to each according to their ability, to each according to their need. And also just that, you know, like by virtue of existing, people, they have a right to live with dignity, and it's not tethered to your work or your outputs or, you know, just everyone, we have the ability to support everyone, and so therefore should.
Really radical stuff, eh? I found out the other week, I was just studying Karl Marx a little bit, and I'm not a diligent person, shall we say, but as I was studying Karl Marx a little bit, I realized I've been in the town he was born in at least 3 times, and I didn't know I was there, and it made me really fucking sad, because
Are there no statues of him there?
There probably is. I probably fucking saw one. And
well, he's German, eh?
Yeah.
What town was it born in?
Trier. I can't say it properly, but Trier. But I've been there several times, and man, I wouldn't be surprised if I seen a statue of him and just was like, oh, who's Das German?
Well, you had a lot of drugs to do at that time. You couldn't be expected to remember everything.
Yeah, I had a lot on my plate, so to speak.
Another thing that when I was having that sort of inane conversation with the person talking about things I didn't understand properly, so they brought up the sort of argument that everyone always brings up, you know, that, you know, communism, and historically has often fallen into sort of like dictatorships.
Mm.
So when you talk about, like, because for the listeners, Nat, when we first met, had written was writing full communism now as graffiti on things. Is it all right to say that? We can cut it out if you're going to get in trouble.
I reckon that's fine.
But so you know, like if you're pushing for a communist state, like how would it not sort of end up like Soviet Russia or China?
And also, can I chime in on Dom's question? Had Lenin not died, how different would have things been? And like,
did you know that Nat's a Leninist? So her views might be a bit biased.
Yeah, I'd like to hear them, because I haven't really heard people's speculations on how things might have panned out if Lenin hadn't died.
Um, I forgot the beginning of the question now. What would communism look like if it didn't fall into sort of authoritarianism?
Yeah, like how would that not happen? How would that not happen? Basically, just say if tomorrow, capitalism falls and we're in socialism, we're heading towards communism. I mean, what?
Yeah. Well, I think that's why it's important that communism is based in principles of freedom and self-determination as well at different levels, right? So you have individual self-determination, and it can be like local community levels and expanding out into sort of states and global systems, which hasn't ever really been experimented with. And I guess one of the things that I find interesting about the Soviet Union is maybe tied to what Todd's saying about Lenin and to Dominic's question of it kind of all turning to shit, is like what would have happened if after the Second World War, the Cold War hadn't started, right? Because in terms of like the industrialization of Russia and the time frame that happened in, it's actually really impressive. Like an agrarian peasant society was a competitor in the space race. Like that's actually quite conceptually incredible.
Yeah.
And so if all of this sort of resource wasn't being drawn into a global conflict over like economic ideology, I think that's an interesting speculation on how, if it had just been given the space or possibility to really like develop and cultivate those possibilities outside of a capitalist system, not in the context of war, what might have happened.
Because there was revolution, and then there was like, they were like fighting to survive, right? There was war almost immediately. And it was not an easy task for Lenin, and then following him, Stalin.
Yeah. But it's also the question of like centralization and state authority. And so there's heaps of debates over basically like the political dynamics. So I don't know, my own thinking where I've got to with some of this is like, capitalism is a series of economic principles, right? Like make money, exploit workers, colonize land. It's an economic drive for perpetual growth and profit. And it can work in heaps of different political systems. So you can have like Scandinavian social democratic capitalism. You can have Chinese state capitalism. You can have American extremely neoliberal capitalism, right? Like the political formation around it looks really different. And I've, spent a while trying to think about what communist economics looks like. And I think there isn't really an answer, because communism is based on a series of political principles like freedom and self-determination and not being coerced to work and, those kinds of things. And so that will also look different in terms of the economy, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
So
there's no such thing as communist economics in the same way that you can talk about capitalist economics, because communism is about political freedom.
Oh, that's interesting.
If there is some sort of revolution in New Zealand and you're involved, Nat, you have to keep Dom out of any sort of leadership role, because he wants to, his first move is to either quarantine or even worse, cull people who get up before 11 a.m. He's actually spoken openly about this. So he's
Nat's actually quite lazy as well.
Right.
So she'd probably be into it. Don't you reckon, Nat, if we get rid of those early risers, I think, because they're the ones that are pushing everyone to go to bloody work. They're the ones that have been indoctrinated. I don't know if we can save them, We don't want to waste valuable resources like re-educating them.
You re-educate them in the morning, I guess.
So it's going to have camps.
Yeah, I mean, there's also this group in the UK called Angry Workers, and they wrote like a pamphlet called Insurrection and Production, and they do this interesting thing of basically just like mapping in the United Kingdom like where all the workers are and what they do. So they're like, there's this many 100,000 farm workers and this many of this kind. And then they look at where all their food comes from and stuff. And then they map out in the first few weeks of an insurrection. So kind of doing this thing of like, all right, tomorrow, revolution, we've taken it all. And then they just go through like the food system and the energy systems and figure out like how long it could last and how reliant they are on imports and stuff like that. Because that's one of the questions I'm interested in as well. Like, we're so embedded in a globalized production system that it's really hard to imagine even pulling out of it, you know, like, and the UK, for example, is a net importing country for food. Like, they don't produce enough food in England or in the UK to support their current population. So if you're a communist and you don't want to have global trade of food, say, then you have to enforce some kind of crazy population control or something, right? Like, and so it's kind of being like, production and trade aren't necessarily bad things to happen, but they have to happen on the basis of like genuinely free, like equal exchange, you know, that
Fairness.
It's not that you're exploiting third world countries growing cash crops and stuff for cheap. You know, like what would it mean to have, I don't know, global trade of food or something outside of a exploitative capitalist relationship?
And an interesting thought on that, if you've ever been into a supermarket in the UK, like all their produce is actually like a greyish hue because all their produce is imported. And, you know, the stigma attached to communism is that, like, you know, you're going to live in this greyish world that lacks colour and joy. But like you go into a supermarket in capitalist United Kingdom and it's a depressing fucking experience. It's really sad.
You should go to Iceland because they import their vegetables from the UK. So it's like literally just everything's just rotten.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's next level.
Yeah. Sorry.
No, you go.
I was just going to say, like, New Zealand is a pretty interesting example. If you were going to try and think about like insurrection and production, and, you know, I've often kind of thought like it would be interesting to do a sort of Cuban experiment here. Like, you know, you've got heaps of arable land, you have a pretty small population, and, you know, in the 1970s, New Zealand was producing heaps of its own industry and stuff, you know, like cars and I think like washing machines and stuff. There's like this capacity. Probably wouldn't be too like glamorous, but theoretically possible.
Yeah. I was interested in like things, you know, that terrify people about communism or socialism. And one I was thinking about is the idea, if people hear the idea of no private property, like, does that mean we live in a global commune and you have to sit in on a drum circle? Can you still wash? What else does Nike?
I think you're thinking about anarchists.
Does Nike still exist? But to be serious,
the people's Nikes.
Yeah, I want the people's Nikes. Maybe I could head that. But what does like no private property look like?
Yeah, I guess the first point is there's a distinction between personal property and private property. So personal property is all of your stuff. Whereas private property is about restricting access to resources and things, right? So for something to be property, it has to be like scarce or finite, and you have to be able to limit someone's access to it. It's kind of like the qualitative criteria for something to be property, which is why, say, air can't be property, because there's no way that you could restrict access until maybe we degrade it to the point where you can't breathe and have to make like oxygen gyms or something, like, and you've managed to like make it property. But so it's basically being like, people can't claim ownership over collective resources or the products of collective effort. So in the same way that if you think about like a playground, you know, kids go to the playground, there's like collective use of it, but no one owns it in particular. That's like a good example of commonly held property, commonly held wealth. So we have examples of it all the time. But yeah, if you think about like, you know, Gina Reinhardt owning coal and then being able to set workers to work mining coal, you know, there's no logical reason why this person owns coal. Even if you go back historically, there just has to be a point of dispossession through theft and violence where someone declared that they now own the collectively held resource. And so basically it's saying the conditions of amassed wealth and property are based on illegitimate grounds. They're based on violence and theft and dispossession through an illegitimate legal structure that says that that person now gets to continue to profit from it. And that's the main thing as well. Like, the reason people have to work through this idea of like the means of production and the way that Marx talks about it is because they don't have access to it. So they work for a wage in order to have access to, you know, the products of, the means of production so that they can produce and the system can sell things. But the technical capacity to do those things stays with the worker, even if the ownership changes, right? Like, say a factory gets sold from one capitalist to the next, the workers in it, nothing's changed for them. It's just this, you know, the person who's directly profiting from their labor.
Yeah, well, anyone that's had a job or several jobs has also had a boss that makes all the money that has no idea how to do the job you do, right?
Yeah, totally.
Which is like a real simple way to think of it, I think.
I was really amazed when I first got a job that wasn't just working in the kitchen, and how fucking useless most of the people were that were in high up positions and like just fully incompetent. And I was just like, oh shit, like, because you just get so indoctrinated that like, well, they must know what they're doing, surely they're getting paid all this money.
No, so when I worked in retail here in Melbourne, this is where I really saw through the bullshit for the first time, because like the area managers, people who got into management in the retail sector, they still got fucked over real bad, but they believed in the company. But if you had any qualms or like questions, I was actually talking to a friend about this company today, and I was just like, I had no aspirations. So when they said something stupid to us, I would retort back. And that ensured that I would never be management at that place, because I didn't care about the company. And I remember once my area manager took me out the back room for fucking up. I can't remember what the infraction was, but he sat me down. The first thing he said was, "Todd, you know it's a privilege to work here, eh?" and I just burst into laughter. And I thought he would understand why I thought that was funny, but he just looked so confused. He didn't know why I thought that was a hilarious thing to say, because he fucking loved the company. He was a bootlicker, and that's how he got to management. And he had no idea that he was still being fucked over. Like, even though the boss would turn up to the shop in her fucking Lamborghini, no idea.
Is there anyone that you could point to, or that our listeners could go check out, that you think is sort of taking these ideas and sort of distilling them in a way that's sort of like accessible?
There's a pretty good book by Terry Eagleton called Why Marx Was Right. That's pretty accessible, pretty good.
Why Marx Was Right.
Yeah, it's to the point. But he just works through like a theory in Marx and how we can see it in the real world and contemporary forms. There should be loads of people coming to mind.
Do you think that's one of the issues, right, with Marxism, or probably with any political ideology, but I think particularly with Marxism, because it is reasonably, like, the ideas are quite complicated, and often it does have academic or antiquated language. That's one of the reasons why it's quite hard to talk about. Do you know what I mean? Whereas with capitalism, it's like, it's money and, infinite growth.
Yeah.
And
I mean, because I'm in the university and I'm actually teaching a course on Marx in a few weeks. I think there's 2 points. Like, one is that capitalism thrives on ignorance, right? People not really understanding what's happening. And kind of like what you're saying about your retail manager, like that person doesn't have this understanding of exploitation, basically. And so, it thrives in that. Whereas, like, it is a criticism of academic writing and thinking that sometimes it's real exclusionary because of some of its conventions. But also it's just like, the stuff is kind of hard. Like, the world is complex. And so, Maoist peasants read Capital. So, like, I'm not saying that, everyone has to start with Capital or something. But I think part of the politics as well is believing that everyone is capable of understanding this stuff. So it's about creating inroads, which might be like, having a sort of easier text that introduces some ideas and stuff. But I don't believe there's a person who wouldn't be able to get to a point of, reading the first 3 volumes of Capital.
Yeah,
I've tried a lot. Todd's still reading the abridged version of the Communist Manifesto.
But that's a really good point, because we seem, or it feels like we're incredibly resigned or accepting of capitalism, just because, and for the basic fact that that's our reality, right? And for so many people, like, fuck, I don't even think I understood that was a system I lived under until, I don't know, I was old. Because you just, like, this is the world it's the same way with your childhood. Your childhood's just normal to you, but to someone who lives right next to you, your childhood might be completely bizarre, fucked up. But it's just what you know, so it's easy to be accepting of that, and to not see possibilities outside of what your reality is.
Yeah, totally. Well, that's just how ideology works as well, right? Like, we're conditioned and produced through these structures. And so they appear normal. And it's one of the things as well, like, why collective effort is so important in communism and also challenges to capitalism, is that as an individual, a lot of this stuff is rational. So if you think, like, okay, I'm going to go to work. I know that I'm not paid enough. I know that they're exploiting me. But the alternative is that, you can't pay your rent, you can't buy food. So, go to work. But when we look at it as, like, a whole country or a whole world that does it, when we don't have to, that's the point where it makes no sense. So it's not about attacking individuals for, acting irrationally, because in the current world we live in, that's the only rational thing to do.
Yeah.
And so if you kind of say, well, you're going to work until you die, and you're always going to be doing side hustles just to, like, make ends meet, and it's just going to get worse and worse, and also the world is ending. That's kind of the point where we can, like, do a stock take and think about how things could be different.
I think when you try and explain to someone as well, I mean, we briefly touched on this in the last podcast, but that is like, you're never going to be a millionaire. You're probably never even going to be rich by any account. You know what I mean? And the average person just won't accept that. They're like, well, I mean, how do you know? And it's like, motherfucker, you, like, you flip burgers, or you fucking, like, or even if you got a reasonably decent job, it's like,
maybe if less poor people smoke weed, there'd be less of that. Because you sit around with your poor friends getting high, and you're just like, oh fuck, what if I won the lotto this week, or some nonsense like that. My one with my friends was back in the day when you could, like, kind of hustle a student loan and not spend it on studying.
Yeah.
And it'd be like me and 3 of my friends, and we'd be like, oh, we'll all get student loans. We'll enroll in this horticulture course. So we'll also learn how to grow weed good. And we'll get our student loans. We'll get some growing gear. And eventually we're going to be rich, or we'll at least, like, have a car with a sub in it. Dan's relating.
Did you get one of those loans, Dan?
Yeah. I didn't get a car with a sub in it or a hydro setup, but
What'd you get?
$1 million.
booze.
Yeah, I got none of those things, actually. We just got more high.
I was too fucking stupid to figure out how to do the forms to even get the loan in the first place.
Well,
I'm
I got it. They
quite
just
glad
gave
now.
you, like, a lump sum. Like,
Yeah. I was trying to do that because a bunch of people did it and they all went to Europe, but I couldn't figure out the forms.
Fuck,
I was
those
17 and they just give you, like, I think it was like $8,000 and, like, here you go. This is for the year or something.
Yeah.
Good luck.
Man, the good old days. Fuck, it'd be beautiful if someone had actually, like, written off student loans for all those people that had got those loans. It'd been great.
But isn't that partly why we've got such a big surplus in this country, is because they count all the loan money that they don't have?
Yeah, it's not counted as debt in the same way. So they like count people repaying their loans as income. but the loans don't factor in as debt. Yeah.
Well,
they haven't got my fucking loan money.
Fuck, they're hounding me, man. I've started to have to pay it back. It fucking sucks. Fucking half a BA and a fucking chef qualification.
But education is a good example of communism, right? Like, why are we commodifying and turning that into an exclusive commodity when, education can be infinitely reproduced and it doesn't get worse, Like, if you teach someone something, you don't lose that knowledge.
Yeah.
That can probably strengthen and improve yours. So
yeah,
it's kind of bizarre.
Well, things like, being able to enroll in a school for free, being able to see a doctor or go into an emergency room. I don't think a lot of people understand that those are socialist concepts, right? Like, what's his name? The National Minister for Labor Relations, which is so funny that a national minister can have that in his job title, Labor Relations, because that's the opposite of what he does in his role. He wants unions abolished, and unions have been demonized, and I don't fucking know how, because people, the connection between what unions have given people or given workers, I'll forget all the examples, but weekends, holidays, what are the
Health
others?
and safety.
Yeah, it's just
gender pay parity.
yeah, just so much.
Everything that is good about work has been fought for. Like, none of those things were
but
indolently given by.
You mean a Boston turn around one day and say, "Hey guys, I'm going to give you some more money and better working conditions."
yeah, but politicians constantly get away with demonizing unions in media. Like, the fact that a politician can just come out and say, "Oh, unions should be abolished," and that should be a fucking a nail in your political coffin, because most of the country is made up of workers who get holidays, who get sick pay, who benefit from all these things that unions have got us. It's crazy.
Yeah, well, even the minimum wage. That's another big one.
The dog's gone crazy, so we should wrap up, and I've got to eat my dinner. But thanks heaps for coming on, Nat. In summation, we'll kill all the early risers. We'll kill that guy from National about the anti-union thing.
Dan Benoit.
Dan's going to lose his house, but Todd can keep drinking.
Great.
Yeah.
As long as I commence.
Full communism now.
As long as I commence.
Full communism now.
As long as I commence post 11 a.m.
Yeah.
Okay.
You can start. Well, you can start drinking earlier, but you can't make a big hubbubaloo about getting up and
your
pacing
communist
around.
And your communist utopia. Can I drink throughout the night and be up early in the morning?
Yeah, but you either have to get up at 10 or you have to go to sleep at 10. There's no staying up and making a mess and carrying on.
Okay, very good.
Two things that people are always surprised about Todd is he eats little tiny bits of food, and the other thing is that he gets up really early and just sort of paces around and sort of rearranges crockery and stuff. He'll move the cups from one shelf to the other and stare out the window.
Everyone needs hobbies. Nice to meet you, Nat. Thank you for coming on.
Yeah, nice to meet you guys. Thanks for having me.
I wonder what's wrong with the
Pleasure.
dog. What's wrong, Chili? All right. Thanks, Nat.